Good morning and welcome to the Washington State University Board of Regents meeting. We are excited to get started. My name is Lisa Keohokalole-Shower, and I am the chair of the Board of Regents, and this is my first in-person meeting. Excited to see everyone here. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're broadcasting this meeting live over YouTube, which can be accessed through the link on the Board of Regents website. I'm here sitting next to our university president, Kirk Schultz, and we are eager to start today with a full set of meetings. We are inviting the public to comment at this meeting during a designated time, which will be on Friday at our regular agenda time for public comment. I want to just make sure that the instructions on how. I'm going to just say real quick here how to access our public comment. We'd like to allow up to 10 minutes. Each speaker will be allowed up to 2 minutes each. Preference will be given to speakers who signed up in advance. So if you're interested in addressing the board tomorrow, Friday, September 15th, we ask that you please sign up with our board assistant, Tracy Jordahl. Participation may be in person or virtual via Zoom. The Zoom link will be provided upon signing up. Virtual participants will not be allowed to share their screens and will be removed from the room after their public comment has concluded. If you wish to make a public comment but have not signed up, you can also do so by signing up online at Regents WSU EDU or using the online form, which is available until today at 5 p.m. You can also email Tracy at regents@wsu.edu. Please provide your name, affiliation, and subject matter if you plan to participate in person or virtually. We are now going to move into the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee, and our chair of that committee, Regent Shetler, is unable to be here today, and so we're excited that Regent Dickinson will go ahead and lead the meeting. So I'm going to turn the meeting on over to Regent Dickinson.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marty Dickinson. I will be, on behalf of the chair of this committee, Regent Shetler, going through the Strategic and Operations Excellence Committee report today. For first order of business, I'd like to introduce is through an information item, which is an update on the WSU System Equity, Diversity, and Inclusive for Excellence. I'd like to invite our Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion Excellence, Lisa Guerrero, to join us for her presentation. And this presentation, just as a note, was something that had been requested by Regent Cerna. And so at this time, I will turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Regents. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to give a quick overview of some EDI matters for WSU. The first thing that I will begin with is introducing the EDI officers group. So if we can go to the second slide, that would be great. Oh, I have a clicker. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Kyle. So our EDI officers group, several of the members of the EDI officers group met for about a year informally as a support and network group for folks who are doing equity work across the system. In 2022, President Schultz formalized the EDI officers group and is made up of these 6 folks from across the system. So Celestina Barbosa-Leiker, who's the Executive Vice Chancellor of WSU Spokane, Obi Ford III, who is the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at WSU Vancouver, myself, Zoe High-Eagle-Strong, who's the Vice Provost for Native American Relations and Programs and Tribal Liaison to the President, and Kelly Newell, who's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Strategic Partnerships at WSU Global, and Anna Plemons, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs at WSU Tri-Cities. As you can see, Obi Ford and myself are the only 2 leaders whose sole purpose is to work in equity. So that means that all of our other leaders on the group do equity work in addition to other primary responsibilities. In the first year, this group has largely played an advisory role regarding various institutional policies and statements. And at the same time, each leader has continued the equity efforts on their respective campuses. As system equity priorities are further determined, this group will participate in a larger way. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about are the equity matters that were identified during academic year 2022-2023. So these are things that will go into this coming academic year. So the first is the Equity Impact Assessment Tool, which was mentioned briefly earlier. This was developed by a system working group tasked by President Schultz, and the EIA tool helps WSU use a systematic application of equity lens on existing and future policies to help identify potential disparate effects. It's actually made up of a series of questions that embed equity and disrupt oppression within an institutional structure and system. While currently focused solely on policy development and revision, as the use of the EIA tool becomes more regularly integrated into our institutional practice, there is the potential for it to be used in various other institutional practices, including recruitment, mentoring, curriculum development, and assessment. The second bullet on this slide is SB 5227. In May 2021, as you all are likely aware, this Senate bill was signed into state law requiring diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism training and assessments at institutions of higher education. There are several required aspects that institutions are responsible for implementing. And at WSU, the efforts to address the implementation of the various pieces is being done collaboratively across the Provost Office, HRS, and the Division of Student Affairs. The third bullet point, strategic plan. As WSU continues to develop its vision and practices aimed at strengthening equity, diversity, and inclusion across the system, the strategic plan will be crucial in determining that trajectory. And Vice President Hoyt is following me and will speak to this in more detail, including speaking to Goal 4 of the strategic plan, which focuses specifically on an aspect of equity and diversity practice. And then finally, the bullet point of affirmative action. So again, as most of you are aware, in June 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in Students for Fair Admission Incorporated versus President and Fellows of Harvard College and Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus University of North Carolina et al., that race-conscious admissions are unconstitutional and violated the Equal Protection Clause. Though the use of race as a consideration in admissions has been prohibited in Washington state since 1998, the potential ripple effects of the 2023 SCOTUS decision remain important and necessary for WSU to consider and to prepare for. President Schultz has suggested that an advisory group will be convened to take up the question of next steps in the wake of the decision, and that will likely include some members of the EDI officers group. So that is my report to you all, and ready for questions. Well, kind of ready for questions.
Questions?
Lisa, you didn't, yeah, I mean, you sort of introduced yourself, but not really, but maybe perhaps give a little bit of your background. You've been on the faculty for a while. Just, I think everybody would be curious to know.
Thank you. Yes, so I've been at WSU since 2004. Despite my LinkedIn saying I've only been here for 13 years, I've actually been here for 19, so I don't know what happened there. I am a professor of comparative ethnic studies. I'm a scholar of 20th and 21st century African American literature and pop culture, and I teach basically around systems of marginalizations and different histories and structures of race, racialization, and racist systems. So.
If I may, also, Lisa started off as a associate vice provost and leading the cluster hire in racism and social inequality that we've been running for 3 years, and now Lisa is continuing that leadership in her new role as vice chancellor for EDI as well. So thank you for your leadership in that and all of that entails.
Yes.
Excellent. Any other questions?
I do have a question. Sorry. Thank you, Lisa. I saw in your EDI officers group there was representation except for Everett. You just
Yes. So we did have representation for Everett. Lynn Varner was our representative on the EDI officers group for WSU Everett. Sadly, in the spring, she took another job. So we have not yet identified. So yes, we didn't leave Everett out. Lynn just went and took another position. So yes.
Chair Shower.
Regent Cerna, I'm really pleased that you asked for this presentation, and I'm very excited to see the work that the EDI group is doing. As a professional, I have had the opportunity to have the Building a Community of Equity at my company, and was so incredibly impressed, and have mentioned to President Schultz how excited I am about that program and the work that's being done, particularly for private organizations within Washington State, because I think that it really allows academics to be utilized in for-profit organizations. And that's, I think, so important. I am curious if you could share today, or maybe at our next meeting, how can the Board of Regents continue to learn, and as we are on a journey of equity, how we can embrace our mission of as a land-grant university and center equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, particularly in our role as strategic advisors and in a governing way. If there's any ideas or thoughts that you have, but I think it's so important that the tone from the top of the organization is really clear about how important the work that you're doing is, and how we're integrating that throughout the organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. So yes, training is crucial, and I really appreciate your use of the word journey, because really any type of equity work and practices should be thought of as a journey. There is no end destination to that work. It really does need to continue. And so trainings are a good start, but it isn't a one and done. It also requires that after trainings, people take accountability for continuing to develop on their own. WSU, at all of our campuses, we have various types of trainings. I know that BASE is something that you all are familiar with from WSU Vancouver. I do trainings here at WSU Pullman on implicit bias, on equity-minded mentoring, on DEI practices in hiring, and they all come with resources. All my trainings, and I have to imagine all the BASE trainings too, come with resources that you can use to further look into different issues. On the system level, on the institutional and strategic level, I think it really does require some discussion about agreement around languages, around priorities, around resources. Largely the EDI officers group, we function as an advisory group because we don't really have resources to function sort of more broadly beyond our own singular office resources. And so resources is definitely something that is important to solidifying systemic commitment to EDI. But that does, again, require some agreement about what are the equity priorities for the institution. Largely, I would say most people would agree that the equity priorities are in recruitment and retention of all of our communities, faculty, staff, and students, but also as well as building certain types of cultural humilities and intelligences around how we can integrate equity into all of our practices. I think largely one of the challenges that we face in thinking about equity on the systemic level is that most people from the top all the way to the bottom think of equity as an additive and don't think critically about how we integrate it, how practices should be integrated with equity instead of just adding it. I know Zoe Heigl-Strong and myself have been in several contexts last academic year where we kept repeating, you can't go through an entire process and then ask people like Zoe and myself to come in and add equity at the end. So I would identify those spaces as next steps to really think about how we can fully integrate equity and diversity practices.
Yes, Regent, sir.
I'm just curious. I know that this is sort of an ongoing thing, trying to figure out what the impact is. But after the ruling on affirmative action, where are we? I mean, how does that affect? It just seems to be cloudy to me.
Immediately, we're where we were before the SCOTUS decision, because again, race and admissions consideration has been prohibited since '98. So our immediate reality hasn't been changed much. But having gone to a lot of panels and webinars, read a lot of articles, most scholars and experts in the legal field and in the equity and diversity field predict that it will not stop at admissions, that this will have a larger effect and that eventually there will be different sorts of decisions and lawsuits that come down. So as I said, it's important for WSU now to consider different next steps as well as what might be repercussions that we will feel. So one instance, as a land grant institution, and most of the colleagues I have at other land grant institutions have been very much thinking about this, is that for Native enrollment, right, when we're thinking about admissions, Native enrollment can be thought of in two ways. It can be thought of racially, right? But it's also thought of as tribal citizenship. And once we start getting into that gray area, what are the practices that we can use to do different things when we're focused on trying to recruit particular groups? Many of the experts, the legal experts say, and this goes to Lisa's question earlier, is to really have a very clear set of commitments, very specific set of commitments that the institution identifies as their mission, so that when we do, say, have particular recruitment events for particular groups, we can justify it by pointing back to the very specific language of our commitment, whatever it is. Native recruitment could be one ripple effect. Financial aid could be one potential ripple effect in the future, especially those scholarships that are particularly focused on particular groups. It's going to require, especially as a land grant institution, to think innovatively about how we identify regions and communities, so that we are still focusing on those communities that we would like to, see more broadly at our institution, without saying, Native communities or Latinx communities. These are going to be real imperatives because everyone is predicting that this will not be the end of the discussions around race and college engagement.
Okay. Any further dialogue? Thank you very much for your presentation, and you did a great job answering the questions. So thanks for being here today. Next up is an information item that we have regarding the WSU strategic plan implementation, and Chris Hoyt, Vice President of Strategy, Planning, and Analysis, will be joining us. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. So a lot has happened in the last year regarding our processes for implementation and progress, substantive progress toward achievement and progress toward working on our mission and achievement of our vision and our goals. So you have in your packets 2 reports that were placed in there. One is a final wrap-up report from last year. And you recall we had reports on this throughout the year. And mine is I'm doing a verbal. I don't have a PowerPoint for you. We had 19 strategies, as you recall, last year that we worked on under our 4 goal areas and 4 objectives that were affiliated with that. And so just very briefly, and this is in your write-up, but we ended the year with 11 strategies on track. 7 were complete and 1 that we determined would not be met. And there's more detailed comments. I won't go into those in the report, just on the disposition of those. Several of those moved forward. Those strategies moved forward with us into this year because many of them are longer term, a little bit longer term than just 1 year. For example, those efforts around things like retention and our efforts around developing and increasing our research and development expenditures, for example. Just a couple of quick highlights for you and successes. Last year we came into this and we had not reported to you in a very specific way, and we had a lot of input from the Regents, particularly thanks to Regent Dickinson. She shared a lot of samples and insights, as well as Regent Shetler helped us to really get on track regarding how we report progress. And we really appreciated that because it helped validate just sort of the direction we were going, and also recognizing the way WSU Vancouver was doing it. They were certainly ahead of the way that we were doing it. So we tried to get that process going, and it feels really good to have had a year under our belts to be able to say, okay, we can come together and collaborate around this and continue to report our progress and build something that shows us that we don't just put our plan on a shelf, we do implement it and we do report it. So getting everybody rowing in the same direction was good. There's, I don't want to go too specifically into each and every one of these things, but one success and one thing that we hear a lot about is the fact that when you're going to do something like this, you need to help fund it. And for example, with our Carnegie classification, we have a lot of work to get us really rallied around a definition, for example, of engagement with Carnegie, or within that whole goal area of what we talk about as outreach. We started the year not being able to define what that meant, and it still means a lot of things. But now we do have a definition for what engagement means and what it means to work with our communities that are so important to us in so many ways. It's about the people and the communities that we serve. And so we're rallying around that and moving that forward and funding a platform that we can use to collect the data that's going to be able to prove that we are a Carnegie engaged institution. It's just an example of being mission driven and really focusing on those things that are important to WSU. Right now, the impacts are really internal because we have to rally around that and build that. So again, I won't focus too much on that, but I just wanted to highlight that there are improvements that are being made that are a direct correlation with the work with all the folks that are doing this. And again, not to steal anybody's thunder in terms of where we're moving with regard to some data points, but really, really important things like closing the equity gap. Again, rallying around something that is really close and dear to the identity of WSU and moving those trends in positive directions. And I'm talking about with regard to race and ethnicity of the equity, the closing the gap between the retention of categories of students in our overall population. So that wraps up that part of the report. This year, so one of the things that we did was we recognized that we needed a better reporting function. It's really hard to do this on an Excel spreadsheet, particularly as a system. And so we purchased some software. It was called Achieve It. And so you see that in your report. You see a new reporting format. It still has a lot of the same elements to it. It just looks a little bit different, but it's got a lot of power behind it because it's not just a reporting mechanism, but it really has tools in it that will help us to figure out what does alignment look like? What does it actually look like when you have your campuses aligned with regard to your strategic goals? And so we are piloting with, starting with Vancouver and Tri-Cities first, and we're going to be working on that with the utilization of our technology to help us to show what that looks like. So we're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction. So just to orient you, the first page of that report really is just an overview report that outlines those objectives that are very much led by President Schultz, and then the other objectives that are led by other folks, but under President's leadership. But then it goes into the very specific objectives, the strategies around those, so that you can see, how we are going to and how we are implementing and what our actions are going to be as an action plan. There are, within that, we have 14 objectives that are outlined in the report, and they have 12 that have not started yet. We're just getting going. 30 of those are on track, which is no surprise. That's a large number because, again, we're just getting going. 2 are off track, and we called that last year caution. So it's just a caution around them for us to be watching as we move forward. We have 2 that are at risk. Those were the red, and then 1 that actually has been achieved already. For next steps, for the metrics that have been identified, and you saw probably in President Schultz's objectives for 23-24, there were metric and data points that were outlined in those. And those will have visualizations around them. So we'll be building those visualization reports. We're also going to be working on metrics in a larger sense and visualizing and putting into one place those that are most important to the institution from a strategic standpoint. What are those things that are close to our mission that really help us to monitor our success toward achieving that and toward and making improvement toward being really excellent in everything that we do. So we'll be working on that this year. I already mentioned that we'd be working closely with Vancouver Tri-Cities. We obviously won't stop there in all the campuses in terms of aligning around the system goals and developing processes within our office. So we talk a lot about trends, and the Regents looked at many of those last June. And so we need to get a really good regular process in place in order that we are doing that environmental scanning, if I can use a strategic planning nerdy term, that really helps us to make assumptions about what the future looks like. So macro trends, micro trends, what do those look like? How will those potentially impact WSU? What is happening here and what does that look like? So we're really working hard on that process. And then just, again, refining these reports, and what you see here in terms of the Achieve It platform is live on our web. So developing that so that it's transparent to everybody, because one of the reasons plans fail is because you don't communicate them. And so really engaging in a good practice of communication around what we are doing, getting those annual reports out, and being accessible, having that information accessible to all who need it for planning or for interest or in being informational. And that concludes my report.
Chris, I have a question in regards to the Achieve It platform.
Uh-huh.
And the formatting, which
Right.
I like the dashboard, and I like seeing that. I like the format.
Uh-huh.
Are you able to build? I'm just thinking a little bit, Kirk, where we've asked Kirk to have tie-in to the strategic initiatives, like goal-wise.
Yeah.
Is there consistency that even if someone's own goal structure could look similar? Can you do that in this particular platform?
Yeah, do you mean in terms of a report and showing that actual tie-in?
Uh-huh.
Yes and no. There are limitations to what the platform will do, but in terms of aligning to that, I believe that is the case. And I'm turning around because I've here Ben Pingle, who is our Director of Strategic Planning and Communication, who is really the one who does the nuts
Yeah,
and
it
bolts
just,
of it.
it could be interesting around each of our locations.
Yes.
All having a consistent format and everybody's dashboard looking the same.
It is.
That ties up to Kirk ultimately has a dashboard.
Yes, the answer is yes. And that is part of our pilot program, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
what we're doing.
Good.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Questions for Chris as you look through the report?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Chris, I'm a huge fan of what you do, and the process is so disciplined, and the intention around transparency and inclusion, right? Everyone's on this journey. I'm curious if you have maybe tested varying communication strategies, and maybe like invited some of our youth to translate our business speak into emotive, touching, like, I really grasp our vision kind of speak
Right.
for that particular audience, so that for me, like, the test is if I walk the campus and I encounter the students or the faculty and they all can say, yeah, I'm just really jazzed about this really cool strategic plan.
Right.
Where is that in your journey? Because it's such a disciplined process, and I know it's very thoughtful.
Yes.
So I'm looking for the emotive ingredient, I
Right,
guess.
right. No, I that's a great question. And yes, it is very, very much on our minds. We have, as part of our objectives this year, to build out that communication strategy, not only just within our office. And one of the things that Ben is working on, poor guy has a lot on his plate, but we'll just add one more thing. But one of the things that he is working on is not only the communication strategy around that and translating it into real things that actually say something other than just a process kind of a thing, but also working with Vice President Weiler's office, as well as has put together a group, I can't remember what we call it, but it's with the communicators on each of the campuses and looking at what they have done in order to translate that into very real, sort of impactful and something that means somebody. So yes, that is very much on our plate, and that is very much something we're going to be working on this year. But I do like the idea of seeing how we might be able to utilize, students and what this means to them or could mean to them, and how they might take that and translate it into something that's meaningful for that population and others. So it's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Regent Ramos. Other questions? Regent Isaac.
Just to comment off what Regent Ramos said, I really like the giving that perspective to the students and seeing how they,
Yeah.
read the information, especially being, system objectives of implementation.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Student Government Council, great opportunities to, connect with all student leaders as a
Mhm.
system.
Mhm.
Just because I think it's important for our student leaders to be able to translate this information, and bring that to the student body and say, this is what the WC system is working on. These are the goals.
Mhm.
How can we continue to implement this, in our student view as well? So I totally agree, and I appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
I print everything, which is much to everyone around me's dismay. And I love this iteration of the 6 or so pages. It's really easy to follow. I absolutely appreciate the integration of the presidential priorities with the strategic plan priorities. It's easy to crosswalk that. What I continue to struggle with is the integration with the campuses. And so if I walk on the Tri-Cities campus, am I able to do just what Regent Ramos said, ask a student, what is the plan, the vision,
Mhm.
and are they going to be able to provide, well, the vision here is, and that connects to the vision as a system.
Right.
And it gets even more complicated as we move into the next agenda item and we talk about Pullman's strategic, plan and campus plan versus the system. And so it's a big system and it is complicated. And I think there are so many initiatives moving forward. That the more we have clarity on how to speak to that or even how to organize it in our own minds and be able to track it, the better. And so as you're continuing to evolve these dashboards, which every meeting that we're able to see the work that you and your team are doing, I'm just even more and more impressed and then become even more curious how we'll be able to easily communicate the differences.
Thank you. And having your advocacy for that really, really helps because it's like many things. And as my colleagues have said, it is a journey and it is building and building and building on that. And then having your feedback and input about what's working and whether your expectations are being met or where we could improve really, really helps us because that gives us better direction on how to do this and how to go and to build on your experience about what you have seen in your own organizations as well, because these are journeys that you all also have been on as well. So thank you for that feedback and input, and we'll keep working on it. Yes.
So I always forget the hierarchy here, but on page something or other, operational priority number 1, funding and fiscal stability, objective 7. I'm not sure whether this is a topic that we'll be covering in more detail later on, but can we talk a little bit about this particular objective and how we get it back on track or where it is in the hierarchy of priorities?
Are you talking about specifically the quarterly financial report, or are you talking about the?
Well, I guess this is sort of a cluster of things, but to me, from a business perspective, having this sort of nest of things right
Yes,
is very key. It's sort of it's the engine for the whole operation of the business. If you don't understand what your numbers are, you really can't run anything.
Yes.
So to me, this is sort of super important.
Yes.
And helps us do everything that we do. So there's several things here that are at risk or off track.
Right.
But I guess, and there's a not started too, but I guess I'd like to see it all. And then there's a bunch of things that are on track but are at 0%.
Sure.
So I guess I'd just like to understand more about that whole nest.
Yeah, that's great. I would definitely very much defer to my colleague, Vice President Brunelli, to speak to those things because, of course, they fall right within her area and are the very strategies that she is working on and the opportunities that are there to build, as well as the challenges that we have within our systems and things like that, to gain you a greater understanding of where we are and what her particular challenges and barriers toward that are, because that's yes, foundational to everything that we do. So if it's okay, I'd like to defer to her. So when she comes here, she can speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Regent Pika.
I guess I'm wondering about the alignment between the strategic plan and I know we're going forth with a campaign and just that alignment and the communication that's going on in developing that case for support
Right.
outwardly and what
how that's going to. So one of the aspects, I guess, of alignment and again, to use sort of strategic planning terminology, the integration of the planning efforts or the substance of those efforts. So we have on the docket another aspect to that this fall. We're just starting a series of one-on-one meetings. So this is really about process, but we're looking, the outcome being is how do we better integrate those very, very critical and key planning processes and the substance of those to the overall goals. So that includes not only campaign planning, but marketing communications planning, budget planning, our legislative planning, our capital planning, all of those major processes. So what does it look like when those really start gelling together? We are, and it's not that none of that is going on right now. Of course, some of that is going on, but it is from a system standpoint, and getting that running as a system is definitely a big challenge. And so we're going to start the process this fall as part of our whole alignment effort, or alignment initiative, if you will, to work toward that. So again, we're going to be doing some one-on-one meetings. We're going to really start really basically and just sort of figure out when do all of these things happen, but then start to work toward, okay, so if these things are happening, what does it mean? And we're also, it's really, I won't go too far into it because you'll have X's for eyes after it, but it really is sort of an interesting thing because we're really somewhat constrained on some of just the way we do it because of the way calendars work, the academic year versus, the legislative calendar versus all that. So we've got to get in sync and understand what each of us does when we do it and what we're doing, and then really talk about if these are our priorities, and these are the very top things that we determine as an institution that are critical to us, critical to our mission, and not just from a process standpoint, but from an outcome standpoint. These are the improvements and the successes we need. Then we have to determine who all is working on those and how do they work together. Because some of these things, and what I think we're all getting at is they don't live in isolation. If it is important and things like access to education are critically important to us, then it's not just the job of a few in the provost's office or in student affairs. It is everybody's job. So we'll work toward that. So it was a long answer to a simple question. It's very much on our minds, and we'll work on it.
Okay, in the interest of time, because we have some action items to get through, Chris, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving into the action item portion of our committee meeting, and our first action item will be the President's 2023-2024 Annual System Objectives presented by President Kurt Schultz.
Great. Thank you all. Just as a reminder, we talked about these a little bit this summer, and there were several between when we first put them out and today. We got a bunch of feedback, and so there's several changes to make. So rather than go through them, what I do want to highlight is the things that would be different than they were this summer. One of the first things the Regents asked to say, it's great to have all these things on there, but that's too many. Kirk, which ones are really the priority for you as a system president? So we grouped them into two categories. There are 4 key items that are under the presidential priorities, where I'm the lead. There's another 10 items that are system priorities that clearly are the types of things our university community would expect the president to have some role in, but that there are actually other vice presidents and members of our executive team that are leading those particular areas. So we try to prioritize and cut down on those things, but recognize the WSU community does pay attention to what types of things I'm held accountable for. So dropping off all the other things and just having 4, there would be people go, well, what about this area? And what about this area? So we felt this was a nice compromise between a really small set of things and, but clearly prioritizing those. We also have heard consistently from the board, it's important to tie goals in with dashboards and the ability to sort of see on a very continual basis, not once a year how things are going, but monthly, quarterly, whatever the frequency is of data collection. Chris has integrated these, or Vice President Hoyt, has integrated these with some of our planning tools, and I think just made it so that you all will be able to look at any time and go, where is Kirk on his goals and objectives quantitatively as we measure that each particular month. So this was an important step forward to get a legitimate available dashboard to measure those things. There was also a number of suggestions that came from faculty and other places generally. And what we've tried to do is put those in. Objective 1 under the whole presidential thing is really, the question came up again and again, you spent a bunch of money on system related stuff, system president, Pullman chancellor, these types of things. What has that actually done to accomplish and making things better for students or faculty or staff? Now that's such a broad thing, but we felt we got to narrow that down and actually focus a little bit on one thing in particular. And so that first objective is leveraging the system to make sure that there's some cost benefit things to our students so that students can say, hey, we have something today that we can do, which is better than we could have done 3 years ago or 4 years ago before we had the system structure. So we need to identify that, identify the economics of that, how it saved resources or money or made things better for our students. And this is a start in this. I think each year, this one will get bigger and bigger with different things on there because we've sort of invested in the system. Now we've got to make sure that we're showing some efficiencies and some better operational practices because the system's in place, not just added a layer of bureaucracy. Under objective 3, under the system goals on research, there was some criticism that we were just doing a percentage increase. We're going to increase by the rate of inflation or something like that in research. That doesn't really talk about national norms. So what we actually did was that goal is to raise our ranking. That's a quantitative ranking by the National Science Foundation, where WSU sits with public research universities. So we wanted to move up by a certain number of percentage point, a certain number of points there, as opposed to we just want a percentage increase. People said you could hit your percentage increase and we could actually decrease our national ranking in that space. So let's go back to a national ranking and hold the leadership accountable. So we changed that. One of the other things that's come up several times is even though some of our faculty numbers may look better, we're not growing our research active faculty. I think we've had several conversations within the board with Judy, with others around this. And so this was explicitly added also in that particular space is, what's our plan for building out our research active faculty in our future. And then finally, I'll point out system 8 objective under system objective 8 around the athletics budget for this particular year. Interestingly, we added a representative from the Faculty Senate on a committee that is led by Vice President Brunelli that meets once a month with athletic staff as well as a Faculty Senate representative to say, are we hitting where we need to each month, not waiting for Regents meetings or quarterly or anything like that. And I think that has been really productive to have that additional set of eyes and viewpoint as we make sure that we stay within our budget with intercollegiate athletics. So I'll stop there. I just want everybody to know we did make some concrete changes and modifications based on feedback that we've received from a variety of folks, or I've received. And I appreciate Chris and her team and the way they structured this, put it together, put the dashboards behind it. I think the board's been asking for this for some time to have it structured in this way. And I look forward to continuing to evolve around alignment and other things that the board continues to point out.
Thank you, President Schultz. Questions as we look at this for President Schultz? Chair Shower.
I love this. I think I just said that. This is fantastic. Our athletics is taking a lot of your time. And so I don't know if that needs to be more prominent here, would be my first comment. And the second would be the objective 1 on leveraging the one WSU. I think the cost-effective solution and the benefit for our students is fantastic. I also think that demonstrating the benefit to our faculty is important as well. And I don't know if adding that is possible and or if you feel like that is already covered in some of the other comments that you made. So those would be my 2 comments.
I'll look at Chris. We'll modify objective 1 to add faculty in there as well. And the stuff with intercollegiate athletics, it's not the budget that's taking all the time. It is the conference realignment piece that's taking all the time. I'm not sure I need to add that in there because that's a clear board expectation to work in that space. So we can add something tonight if you want to see that on there. But otherwise, I think it's probably sufficiently covered. That's
normal crisis management.
yeah. I mean, and I'm probably spending half my time on this right now. I mean, it's just, and I need to. I mean, it's thankfully we've actually, interestingly, built a structure that allowed the system president to be able to do that because I'm not trying to do day-to-day leadership of the Pullman campus or any of our other campuses. And I think 2 years ago, this would have been really, really hard to try and spend the time I need to on the strategic part for WSU. So we'll add the faculty piece because you all, if you're going to approve them tomorrow, you got to have that in writing. So we'll make sure we have that ready for tomorrow.
Well, I'm just mentioning it, and I'm one of this group of board members, so I just suggested it, but certainly open to other feedback. I mentioned the athletics publicly just because I do believe, to your comment, it's important that we are talking about it takes time and effort and strategy, which means that it is also important that we're looking at what you're not doing and where others are leaning in, which is why I really appreciate the way this has been set up, because it's not only emphasizing what we're asking and prioritizing our president to do, it is also emphasizing what our other leadership is needing to do.
We'll add under presidential priorities, objective 5 around our conference affiliation. So again, I'll work with Chris. We'll do that tonight, and that way that'll be in here tomorrow. Not sure there's a dashboard on that. It's like a 1 or a 0, but I think
It
we'll
could be a
add that in.
dashboard of its own.
Yeah, to recognize that. So yes, thank you. I think those are good suggestions.
I concur with that too, Chair Shower. This document is meant to be fluid at times and be able to be adjusted to the needs of what the university is looking for and asking for. So certainly appreciate faculty being added. I think it's very important in lieu of feedback we've received as regents, and then wanting to validate and acknowledge that it is considered important enough that it is front and center. And then the academic piece or the athletic piece, you just can't have something that takes 50% of your executive's time and not be able to call it out for the purpose of being able to have Regents support you, Kirk, as we evolve and things change and what might look very different 6 months from now.
This is not a suggestion on new wording, so that's good. But I did want to just mention on, I guess it would be objective 1, that one of the things that I liked about that objective and just wanted to double click on is that I think it's one of the things that we are doing that is innovative and potentially leaning into the transformation that needs to occur in higher education. And I wanted to encourage you to push harder into that and ask everybody who needs to change as part of this evolution to stretch a little bit more to get the advantages out of the one WSU that we can get to benefit our students, our state, our mission, because I do think we can get more juice out of that orange or apple, we should maybe say, if we just ask everybody to just be a little bit more flexible, because you have set up this opportunity now structurally to really get us where we want to be. But we need to keep asking people to embrace that change. And so I know it's hard because there's been a lot going on, and obviously there are many crises and fires to put out. But this is where we now get to do some good things. And so I just want to give you that support and also a little nudge to just keep doing that work and ask the rest of the community to do that work, because it's change is not easy, and change management is not easy, which is why some of the stuff we're doing on the back office stuff is not easy. But this is what I'm really excited about, is seeing the fruits of this labor. So don't stop pushing in that area and ask people to accept it.
Will do. That's a reason there's a reason it's at the top. So thank you.
Very good.
One question I had, Chris, and this is for Kirk too. In your report, Chris, as well as in Kirk's, is there a way that you tie this back or you put some language into this information that reaffirms the land grant mission? I think as we are evolving, and certainly as higher ed is evolving, we need to re-educate in a subtle but overt way around why we're here and what that land grant mission is. And I think there's a lot of good language that could be integrated so that people are getting educated on what it means to be WSU, a land grant university for the state of Washington.
And maybe just to emphasize that point, that contemporary language around food security and how we play a role in the world. Our access to our agriculture market and talent really does serve the world. And so how do we amplify that in just the language that we speak? It may not have to be in the words, but the spirit of
the
it.
tone in which
the tone.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. Do you want us to integrate some of that tonight into some part of the annual system objectives? I just don't want to come back tomorrow and you go, well.
No,
guys
that's not an
blew us off,
overnight
so-
thing, in my opinion,
Okay.
Kirk. That is
Okay.
not, and it's a recommendation. I just think it would serve us better to start a discipline, because change is going to come so fast to higher ed, and that we also have to continue to have the discipline in all of our communications. And I speak to Phil on that too, around the reaffirming of what our role is as a land grant. Because universities and what their role is changing so rapidly. So, but not for tomorrow.
Okay, perfect.
Any other feedback for President Schultz at this time? Okay, we are going to move in then to our WSU Pullman Strategic Plan update, and we have our Provost and Executive Vice President, Elizabeth Chilton.
While Elizabeth is getting set up, just on this point, it's clear that the strategic plans all have to be approved by the regents. So this is also, it turns out Elizabeth and I had this conversation. I said, where's the Pullman strategic plan? And she said, well, the regents haven't formally approved it yet, so we can't kind of roll it out. So this is a really important step today. And as we move forward, this is like everything, it'll evolve over time and we'll have to be flexible. But I just want the board to know it's really important to approve some of these so we can actually start rolling them out and talking to faculty and staff and doing more of those kind of things on each of our campuses. And this will be a really critical role the board continues to play. So Elizabeth, thanks.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to give a short overview of where we are today and where we'd like to go with this, but we are asking for formal approval by the Board of Regents for the Pullman Strategic Plan at the meeting tomorrow. I want to start off by thanking the 22-member Pullman Strategic Planning Committee that was led by Tri-Chairs Jamie Nolan, Craig Parks, and Dean Mary Rizak. This was initiated in January of 2022, which was the first month that I became chancellor. I initiated the first ever Pullman strategic planning process, which was a pretty intensive process that took place over the course of that spring and into the summer. And then you may recall that exactly 1 year ago, I presented this to you as an information item, future action item. I presented a very similar version to what you're going to see today. But then we wanted to wait for two things. One, the system strategic plan was developing and refining its roles and metrics. And we wanted to make sure, really to Regent Shower's point, that we were aligning with the system strategic plan. So I'm going to point out in my presentation how the goals of the Pullman strategic plan map onto the system strategic plan, which is a direct one-on-one mapping. I think really each campus should reflect the system plan, but then emphasize in the details of its actions the uniqueness of each of the campus locations, right? How you embody student success in each of our campuses is going to look different, but the goal is the same, right? So I'll mention that. Our tri-chairs led 28 different listening and feedback sessions over the course of those 9 months, and they also had more than 1,000 individuals respond to a campus-wide survey. And the committee included community members as well as faculty, staff, and students. So I want to show you just really quickly, I'm going to ask Kyle to flip to a website You can just find this if you Google Pullman WSU strategic plan. You will find this. This has been on the web for about a year so that we could continue to have feedback on the draft strategic plan. And if Kyle, if you don't mind just scrolling through here, you'll see we have the different focus areas that you have in your packet in the form of a narrative. Keep scrolling down, please. You've got 5 different focus areas, and then you can click on each one of these. It gives you more detail on each of the objectives. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, you can see the committee members who took part. And we were able to receive feedback over the past year as we anticipated the approval of this. So now I'll go back. So I'll review the goals and metrics here, and then pending Regents approval, we will move forward with establishing and refining the goal targets for each metric, and then report to you annually on our progress on these. So first of all, the first goal, this is our goal 1. The order is not intended to indicate a priority, but of course we're here for students, and so student success is the #1 goal listed in the Pullman strategic plan, with the idea that we're creating a student experience on the residential campus here that really extends beyond their lives at WSU, so that we're building a seamless approach to student success inside and outside of the classroom. So our tentative metric for this would be first-year retention rates, because that indicates how well we're welcoming students, how much they feel that sense of belonging. Our current first-year retention rate, by the way, is about 82%. So about 82% of our first-year students remain at WSU. And that's up actually from 2017, which is good, given that we've had a pandemic in between. But it's still lower than our Pac-12 peers. Oregon State University, for example, is about 87%. They're the next lowest in the Pac-12 peers. Some are as high as 97%. So we're going to work with our strategic implementation committee to say what is an appropriate goal for a campus of our size and location. And I would love to see, even though 82% is a nice number, I would love to see it up closer to 90 or over 90%. So we'll be determining an appropriate number. Also want to break that down by Pell eligible students and also students of color. For Pell eligible students, that number is only 73.5%. And that's actually down a little bit from 2017, down about 2%. Again, that probably reflects pandemic conditions. But for students of color, it's actually up a little bit. So I think we need to dig into some of those numbers and see where we're being successful and how we can make sure that we're fostering that culture of belonging and success. The other number here is that the number of doctoral degrees awarded. This is something, we wanted to choose metrics that we could look nationally and have a good benchmark that we could actually measure whether we're being successful. And the National Science Foundation has a survey of doctoral degrees awarded. And so we awarded 245 last year. We're also small compared to this campus is small compared to a number of our peers. If we wanted to be in the top 50 in the United States, we would only have to get to about 325. And so what I would say is if we take a close look at what we can do to increase the success of our doctoral students and the growth of our research programs, I think that number is achievable. So again, we'll be working on what should that number be given our size and diversity of disciplines here. Yes, Brett.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. But I did have a question on the retention aspect. But the reason I ask is sometimes you look at some benchmarking and then you question of how that benchmarking may be interpreted. So if we're meeting one goal of inclusion and the like of giving students a chance that they may not have at another institution, perhaps they may not succeed, whereas some of the higher retention rate institutions may screen those applicants so they're darn near guaranteed
Right.
success.
Mhm.
Whereas, so it may not be a total negative as you examine those numbers,
Absolutely.
that maybe we're casting a broad net,
Yes.
and that first class, um, some may not succeed, but as you interpret that, I would encourage you to take
You're
that into account.
you're absolutely right, Regent Blankenship. We have a much higher percentage of first-gen students at WSU, at all of our campuses than many of the other peers that we measure ourselves against. So that's a really important qualifier. Yes, Regent.
I'm going to try to be very careful as I make this plea. I fully support the first year retention as a high priority goal. I fully support the idea that we're getting down in our metrics, but I would really like to see the 6-year graduation rate added
Yes.
to this list.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
what I'm seeing is we're putting so much effort into our first year retention that we're forgetting the next 3.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, and I know we discussed this when we discussed the system strategic plan metrics. I would like for this to be a 5-year look ahead, and the fact is that this is a sort of a practical choice in that in the next 5 years, it's what we can do to increase graduation rate. We literally couldn't actually see what the impact of our activities would have. So these are the metrics that we use to see how we are doing. I recommend that we continue to refine and expand the metrics as we move forward. And that absolutely, in the end, the goal is our 4- and 6-year graduation rates. And those are low compared to our peers as well. They tend to track. So I agree that those should be part of what we're looking at, and we do. But I wanted to be able to come back to the Regents a year from now, and I could actually show that something we did in this year impacted how we're measuring. I cannot show that for graduation rates because that is a little bit of a longer term measure, because something we do today might show up in 4 years or 6 years.
My concern is this will influence behavior and this will influence where resources go. And if second, third, and fourth year are not in our set of, clearly stated in our set of goals, then it's harder to get resources for those.
So I'm going to just, Regent McDonald, thank you very much. I'm going to ask us to table that. We're just, we're a little over time. So I want to make sure you have time, Elizabeth, to get through the full plan.
Absolutely. And what I will say is that we are not asking you to approve the metrics tomorrow. We're asking you to approve the goals, and that then the Strategic Implementation Committee will refine the metrics and the action plan for meeting the goals. And so there is opportunity to continue to refine. I just wanted to make sure you knew we were thinking about the metrics. This maps on to goal 2 in the system strategic plan, this student success metric, just for those of you following along. The second goal, which is building a campus environment that fosters growth, belonging, and safety. We are proposing to look at the National Survey on Student Engagement and SSE, for those of you who are familiar with it. This is completed by first year and senior students at WSU. And we have a very good satisfaction right now, but we would look around how students, whether they report that they would definitely or probably would attend WSU again. Right now, our seniors are saying 82% of them say that they would attend WSU again, and our first year students say 86% of them say that they would, right? But is that a good number compared to peers, and how do we make sure that we continue to ensure that they're satisfied? So the second goal here is, that should not be goal number 1. This should be our second goal, which is innovation in research and creative activities. This does map to the system plans goal number 1. And we would look at WSU Pullman's research expenditures. We report WSU system-wide research expenditures to the Department of Education, because we are one accredited institution and we have one IPEDS reporting. And so we would have to manually pull out Pullman's research expenditures as part of the total. and compared to campuses of our size and diversity. And so that's one of the ways that we would measure this. Of course, this only includes, though, the NSF directorates, but it also includes, the NSF HERD study also includes institutional funds that it provides to support research. But we also want to make sure that we're including creative activities, that we're including things like faculty awards, prizes, and also commissions and art installations. And if you look at what I call the spider web on the left, you may recall that last year I presented to you, we are using academic analytics now to look at how we compare to peers as an institution, but also you can do this by department, by college. And the circle on the inside there shows the mean for that, again, department or college or campus. And in general, WSU is behind its peers in things like awards and national awards and international awards and prizes. And so this is something that we would want to make sure we can increase that nomination process. Our third goal here is employee development, wellness, and belonging. And you may know that we have just released our employee engagement survey. Human Resource Services engaged with this. And we also have a new coach survey, which stands for Collaborative on Academic Careers in Higher Education. And so we have two major instruments that have just been released that we're able to look at how we fare next to our peers in terms of, fostering a diverse workplace that advances the public good, and that also provides for enhanced opportunities for professional development and career advancement. And I'm happy to say a little more about those surveys when we have time. Community engagement. This is our, I don't know why they're all saying goal number 1, but this is the goal number, this must be 4 for us. This is really where I see our land grant mission really being able to be leveraged. And Vice President Hoyt mentioned that we are up for recertification from the Carnegie Foundation as an engaged university. In 2025, we need to resubmit for that accreditation, if you will, or designation. And so we're collecting information on things like the numbers of students and the numbers of faculty engaged in community, engaged service, teaching, and outreach. The same here, that we're looking at the percentage of Pullman courses that utilize service learning in their community as a way to measure the engagement that we have beyond the university's walls. And then finally, institutional effectiveness and accessibility. This is something that is really critically important. The Pullman campus, some of you have heard this from Olivia Yang before. We have a lot of space. In fact, if you look at the square footage of available space on the Pullman campus relative to the numbers of either students or faculty, however you choose to measure, we have more square footage than almost any peer that we measure per person. The quality of that space, however, is lacking, and a number of those buildings really are on what we fondly call the DNR list, which is that they really should be demolished and in some cases taken offline completely and utilize space more effectively in terms of what we have now. So last year we launched a software solution that allows us to run simulations on space utilization for things like classrooms. So we're engaging in that. We're also engaging in a quality of space review. The General Use Classroom Committee is also looking at that to make sure that we're supporting and equitably providing space for students across all disciplines. And then finally, we are looking at this university space inventory to see, what buildings could we potentially take offline and put more resources into updating and improving spaces that we have, not necessarily building new, although that will be the case in some situations, but also putting our dollars and our efforts towards improving the spaces that we already have. So I mentioned briefly that these all map on directly to the system strategic plan. I'm happy to say more about that if there are questions, but our next steps is pending approval. We would plan to release this strategic plan to the WSU Pullman faculty, staff, students, and community members. That has not been done because we wanted to wait for approval from the board. And then we would work with the Pullman Strategic Planning Implementation Council, who I have set up to refine the metrics, develop goals and a scorecard, have an annual reporting material, and create the baselines for metrics and aspirational goals for each of them. So with that, if there is time, I will take questions.
Absolutely. Questions for Provost Chancellor or Chilton? Chancellor Chilton, Fulton.
Just Chilton.
So a couple of things. One, for me personally, the space utilization per capita is important. Again, as we look to where higher ed is going, and higher ed has always just so often built a lot of common space, which I understand is necessary at time, but we're moving into a time when we just have to think differently and better on that. Two things, the community engagement and just economic vitality of Pullman, to me, is going to be a significant matter as we see things evolve with changes that have been made to the Pac-12. We're not talking about what happens to a community when perhaps you don't have 35,000 people coming into it every weekend. And that's the same for Colfax and really Whitman County. I have deep concerns for the economic health of Whitman County as a whole. So I appreciate that you're looking at that. What I don't see, and maybe it is embedded in each of these, is the storytelling around academia of what is happening and what you can do and learn and be able to take from the campus of Pullman, Washington. So it's top of mind to me because I drove through the Palouse. I came the back way from Spokane yesterday, and I passed 3 different combines that had their big wings out with WSU flags hanging off of them. They're in the middle of a wheat field that is feeding the world. And yet we've missed an opportunity, in my opinion, to tell the story of agriculture and what's happening in Pullman and how you're producing students who are consulting with farmers all over the world around wheat and chemicals and regulation and all of those things. So I just, I'd like to go a little deeper around what Pullman is doing globally from an academic standpoint, because it's easy to, not easier, but it's easier to sell the Spokane. Perhaps there's some amazing things happening in Tri-Cities as well as Vancouver, but
Yeah, I do want to point out that, while I did want to have quantitative metrics so that we could say, how are we doing? There is a lot of qualitative statements in the text. So for example, for the goal 2, what we said is that we want to promote a culture that recognizes and celebrates the diverse form of scholarship that leads to the betterment of society and enhance recognition of the scholarly impact of faculty teaching, service, and outreach. So I am in complete alignment with what you're saying, that telling our story, getting it out there, is really part and parcel of what we're doing here. So really want to make sure that the metrics are only part of what we're doing. There's a lot of else that's in the goals that I didn't get a chance to talk to.
Other feedback for Stilton?
I was thinking a little bit along Marty's lines of, and it's in conflict a little bit with, I know what faculty probably wants, which is we have a very broad academic offering with lots of different departments and a lot of excellence in a lot of areas. But from a messaging standpoint, it's very hard to say, we do this and this and this and this and this. What you want to be able to say is, we are really excellent in a thing, or these 3 things, or something that really resonates and says, if you are looking for world-class X, here's the place to come. and something that really sets us apart, which is not necessarily to say that this is the strategic plan thing, but it goes to that sort of uniqueness factor, which I think Marty was trying to get at.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking, sort of the silver lining with the excess space point. And I know other universities have this too, because they're in rural areas, but it might also give us an opportunity to say, well, what are we going to sort of do that's different with our spaciousness? And so I was thinking just sort of as maybe a next step in our strategic planning of what could we do? We used to think a little bit about our dairy as being cool, and I don't know where we are on that now, but what are the other things that we have that are really unique experiences that maybe you can't get at another location of WSU or another university, period. And highlighting some of those things or adding some things along those lines. They're great fundraising opportunities, but they're also there are also things to lean into in a world where things are maybe increasingly going online, but there are some things you can't get online.
That's right. I mean, you'll do notice that one of those things is promoting the arts and elevating the arts for this campus. Our School of Music, our world-class art museum, the new Performing Arts Center in the city of Pullman that they're fundraising for now. That provides that connection to the town, to the city, to the county, and is something you really need to do in person. So, but there are others as well. So I take that point.
Other feedback at this time? One side note, I would just say for all the campuses, I have loved seeing the return to campus and the student posts and reels that have been happening. For Washington State, they've been really, really good. So, and I just want to say thank you to our chancellors, because I know all of you were very heavily involved with greeting kids, moving kids in. I saw you, Elizabeth, schlucking a lot of stuff. So, but as well as our other chancellors on each of the campuses, it's really special. It's something unique about WSU. I'm pretty positive there's not a lot of chancellors that are out there helping kids move in. Mm-hmm. So, well done, you guys. So thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Okay, this action item will be taken before the board for consideration tomorrow, just for a point of clarity. At this time, Chair Schauer, this concludes the agenda items for the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee.
Thank you very much, Regent Dickinson. We are running just a little bit over time. So sadly, you are not going to have a break. If you need a breakfast cookie, you can have one. But we're going to keep moving forward. So we are now moving into the Executive and Governance Committee. And we're continuing to broadcast live over YouTube. Based on feedback from the Regents, I want to revisit the locations for our meetings and our time on campuses with the programs, our faculty, and our students. And I want to just share a little bit about kind of my intent in terms of taking a look at our schedule. Over the 5 years that I have been on the board, I have loved being on each of the campuses. Every time we're on a campus, we learn something new, we engage with new folks, and we really, I think, have the opportunity to really immerse ourselves in what's unique about each of those campuses. And I certainly don't want to lose that. We just had we just spent some time talking about our priorities, the president's priorities, our university strategic priorities, and there are a lot. I value in-person time together. We are asking that our universities show up in person to spend time together and show up to work together. And I also am incredibly cost conscious. And so how do we balance all of that as we look at where our meetings are held? We want to connect with stakeholders, and I think we also want to remain open and transparent. I also want to recognize we are all, for the most part, volunteers participating in our role as regents. And I want to honor our time commitment. And so because of that, it seemed appropriate for us to revisit our schedule. I am looking for action, so we can either make a decision to make some changes and or not have this conversation again about where our meetings are going to be held, at least for the next year or so. We do have a current set of locations, and so this is kind of really pulling that schedule back up and saying we want to look at it again and or reverse direction that we've already given. So I have asked Tracy to look at putting a proposal together. That's what you see in your packet. And President Schultz has been involved in this conversation. Half of our board currently lives in Seattle. And while we do not have actual campus or a location in Seattle, one of the dilemmas that was facing us is where would we actually hold a meeting? And we have been able to kind of come up with some cool solutions. So I don't think that is necessarily one of the things that we need to talk about in this conversation. I don't think logistics is something we need to worry about. I think we can overcome that. What I'm interested in is, are we looking for some solutions relative to where we meet? So you have a list of proposed locations. I'm going to open the floor to discussion. Not everybody speak at once.
I would love to have a meeting in Seattle. Not that I don't like traveling over here or to the other sites. I just think that since we do have half of our regents that are based in Seattle, plus the fact that I think, we often tell Kirk how much we want to see him in Western Washington, and I think that would be an important thing for us to be, have a base there at least once a year. So I think it'd be great.
As somebody who is willing to do the travel, like I'm willing to go to Seattle, obviously it's not a problem. I just don't want to lose focus on the fact that we are part of our commitment to the board is that we get to understand and visit those campuses, and spending quality time on their campuses, on all campuses, are really, really important, just because getting to actually have to live it with them is important. So I'm in favor of what the proposed locations are. I'm a little concerned, and I just want to be on record for that it does not appear, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't appear that we will be in the Tri-Cities again until June of 2025. And is that accurate? That concerns me.
As I was looking at that, the 2025, the location is actually TBD, and the focus is on Tri-Cities. So we may not be at Tri-Cities for the next 2 years, but so that's one thing to point out. The other thing that I noticed is for 2025, we have, if you look at the March meeting that year, the location is Seattle, the highlighted campus is Everett. If you go down to November 2025, the proposed location is Everett, the highlighted campus is Seattle. Now, why wouldn't you focus on, makes more sense to focus on Everett in Everett, and we don't really have a Seattle campus. So, I mean, it just sort of seemed inconsistent.
And we miss Vancouver.
Good comments. Okay. Maybe go ahead, Heather.
Comment.
Yeah.
I think we're letting the agenda maybe drive us a little too much. I think I guess I just sort of disagree with the idea that we're driven by the focus on the campuses, because I think we should be focused on our mission. And I'm not the one setting the agenda, but I think the sort of the routinized focus on individual campuses is a little bit of a distraction from what we should be focusing on, which is our land grant mission, as opposed to specific routine focuses on individual campuses. And to me, the bulk of our population is in the Seattle region, and we should be focusing more on that population, and that's also where the bulk of our donor base is. So I think obviously there's some convenience for some of us of meeting in Seattle. I don't think that's the real issue so much as trying to, in my view, focus a little bit more on that population, and also maybe work in some more conversations with people that are influential in that community, which would be good for us to have some exposure to.
Just really quickly, I know as a student regent, the role is 1 year, but I know that everyone else's role is a little more, longer. But I will mention that there is something that is lost if you're not visiting these campuses, because we'll always have the opportunity to visit Pullman. I think that's so important. But if we don't visit locations like Everett, Vancouver, Tri-Cities or smaller bases, I feel like we're losing something there, and we're not acknowledging, those campuses by being present. I think there's something that's lost there. But I do appreciate, there is something there in that Seattle area. It's easier for us to convene. So I don't want that to also get in the way. But I do want to recognize that there is something lost there if we don't visit, our smaller campuses. But I wanted to make sure I pointed that out.
One thing I'd like to add, I think we've talked about this a lot, but we have a huge amount of alumni in the Seattle area. And I think, we talk about that a lot and how important that is. So I think that, having a meeting in Seattle is worthwhile because of that, and other folks that we can, attract and have an opportunity to discuss things with. So from that end of things, I think that's an important factor. I don't, I agree that, going to all the other campuses is important too. But I also think that we have an opportunity in different ways for us as regents individually to go to the campuses on our own. I mean, I recently went to the Tri-Cities and spoke, and I'll be happy to go back there anytime, in the same thing with Everett or whatever campus. Fortunately, I have the time to do that too, because I'm not working full time. But so I think that we need to keep that in mind. We have a big base in Seattle, and a very, very important base. So we're playing to that audience. I think we should. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, Regent Powell.
And I agree with both what you and Heather said. I'm not opposed to increasing the number of times we go to Seattle, which I think makes sense. But I do want to make sure that however these are played out, that we do rotate some of the meetings through the different campuses, so that we do get to see and hear directly from the students when we're there, and which I think is an important part of that. Like those receptions that we have with the students or the advisory committees, give us an extra dimension for what we're doing. I would like to suggest, we've been holding the January meeting as an electronic one, and I realize there is, the travel issue. If we're meeting in Seattle for that one, it's less of the travel issue, because unless we can't get out of our own home places, because Seattle usually is not difficult to land in. So I would like to encourage not doing electronic. I just feel like every time we have an electronic meeting there or anyplace else, I just feel like we lose a lot. It's just not the same. It's not the same engagement, and just even connectedness.
Regent Ramos.
Yeah, so I just view this as a continuous learning opportunity. These decisions aren't static, and we certainly don't want to message that we're discounting any location. But as a continuous learning opportunity, I think getting out and about, we should sort of think of it as, students have choices in the state of Washington. There are 47 colleges and universities. We need to get up and out and just think about context and those choices and kind of meeting where potential students are also. So, I think change is hard, and I just don't want the message out there that we're discounting locations. We've got to stay focused on the mission with a future perspective, looking for all of our potential students where they are. So that's just my view. Thanks.
2 Regents we haven't heard from.
I would agree that the less electronic, the better. Person to person is better. And as we hopefully move away from COVID, and I would say that our exposure, both from the student standpoint and faculty, to be present on those other sites is important. I'd like to think we have some kind of cadence to this, that what kind of seems sensible to me is that every other year on some of those sites. And I think Pullman, and I would think Seattle, for the arguments that have been made about presence with both our influencers who are there and kind of our exposure there. I think it's important we could make well use of that time as a Board of Regents there. And what else? No, that's my thoughts.
Great, thank you.
Can I just say ditto on Doug's? I like the visit every campus in a 2-year cycle rather than a 1-year cycle, to leave more opportunities to meet in Seattle and to prioritize some of the, as you say, the students, the donors, all the things that are going on in Seattle. And I like the move away from electronic.
We had 3 Regents. Sorry, I thought you had already spoken. Regent Blankenship.
I don't have anything new to add per se. I think the 2-year cadence may be appropriate. As I looked at the 24 proposed amendments, I would lean toward the first meeting being an actual meeting rather than electronic, and Seattle would be fine. That would leave the Tri-Cities focused. We could meet in Tri-Cities as one idea. But while we're also prioritizing, if we have a 2-year cadence on some of the other campuses, and we have met in Seattle a time or 2, I would rather see another meeting at the flagship campus to not lose sight of connection to the bulk of where our faculty are, and to not have people feel like the Regents are too distant. That's just small feedback on those.
I appreciate that. Any other comments before I summarize and wrap us up?
One other just quick thing. For the meetings on the flagship campus, especially the one in the fall, one of the things that we always encounter is people want to do it around a football game, which sometimes makes hotels and everything in Pullman really complicated. I guess the other question I would ask people is, we could move it, depending on schedules, to a non-football weekend on Thursday and Friday here. If people adamantly opposed to that, a lot of you come to games anyway. But it does some nice things to business in town to have some stuff that is not always focused around just when the football team is playing. That's always been one of those things that people went, oh yeah, let's do it around a football game. It just complicates a lot of logistics, to be honest, where if you do a non-football home weekend, you can be here and visit a lot of people, but it's a little simpler.
I can make a selfish comment. I would rather it not be a football weekend because, for instance, I've made time to try to spend here today, which means the weekend's off the table. I have to be elsewhere. So
one thing, I mean, I think it's just been it's been long-term tradition to do it that way, you know, around football games since before I got on the board, which has been a long time ago. I actually think a different time would be better, and maybe even do it in line with like an alumni event, you know, the Alumni Foundation. It just, sometimes they used to line up where you'd have a Regents meeting and all that at the same time. But I think moving it around, you know, if we want to come to football games, we'll come to football games.
I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Any other comments you want to make?
No.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's what I'd like to propose. Let's take 2025 off of the approval agenda for tomorrow, unless I can get something wrapped up and ready to go for tomorrow. But I would like to think about this for just a minute. For 2024, I'd like to propose that we have a January meeting in Seattle. We continue with our Tri-Cities meeting in March. We maintain our Spokane meeting in May, our meeting in Vancouver in June, which will also allow us the opportunity for those that want to participate with the advisory group. That will be in Vancouver. And then Pullman in September, and then Seattle in November. So we do have 6 campuses, and 6 meetings. So if we were to do 1 campus per meeting, we would not have any meetings in Seattle, which is part of our conversation today. So we will have to eliminate some campuses in order to add Seattle to our list. And I like the concept of every other year for each campus. So we'll need to kind of think about the following 2025. So that does allow us twice in Seattle in 2024, and an opportunity to be at Tri-Cities, Spokane, Vancouver, and Pullman. So that's what I would like to propose for tomorrow. Is there anyone who feels like that would be something they couldn't support, or has any other feedback before we move it forward for action tomorrow? Okay. All right. Okay. We'll take a look at the 2025 schedule, given the feedback, and maybe revisiting where Pullman is. And this does not mean that we wouldn't continue to have highlighted campus focus, but I agree with Heather. I think our overall focus is on mission, and I think there's opportunities for us to integrate the work that's being done on the campuses. So, and an opportunity to get out to the campuses outside of our scheduled 6 board meetings. Okay. All right. Next on, yeah.
Just a 5-minute break.
Okay. President Schultz wants a 5-minute break, so he gets whatever he wants right now. Just kidding. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break. All right, so we will reconvene at 10 minutes to 11. Thanks, everyone. We're gonna try and get started here. What I meant by 5 minutes was really actually 15. So hopefully everyone's had a good chance to take a little bit of a break. We probably won't wrap up at 11:45. We'll probably go a little closer to noon and then break for lunch. So Kyle, you just let me know when you're ready to oh, we're ready. We're on, we're ready. Great. Okay. We're continuing with the Board of Regents Executive and Governance Committee meeting. And this next session, we're actually joined by a friend and confidant and consultant that we've been working with. This next session is actually something that both President Schultz and I have been excited to have Kevin Riley involved in helping us. The topic is on principles of trusteeship. And here's what I'm hoping to accomplish with this session. We are volunteers that are all appointed by our governor. We have certain duties, and those are fiduciary duties. We have certain opportunities to provide our support and engagement. And we also have limitations in our role. And so I think that it's both important for us to continue to understand what that role is and how we can best support our university to accomplish our mission. But I also think it is critically important for our stakeholders to understand exactly what that role is. And so what can and should we do as stewards of our public institution, and what should we not do? And so, as you may recall, our Attorney General Nathan Dean has met with us before and has really reiterated and shared some of the responsibilities of our role. This is an opportunity for Kevin to also share with us from his perspective, having served in his capacity, what that role looks like, and for us to be able to have an opportunity for some questions and comments. He will be in person with us in November to facilitate a dialogue. So we have about an hour with Kevin. He has a lot of slides. So hopefully you've had a chance to review those slides and you'll be able to ask any questions you might have there. I do want to make sure that I am honoring Kevin's experience by sharing with you a little bit about his background. So Kevin is a President Emeritus and Regent Professor with the 26 campus University of Wisconsin system, having served as president from 2004 to 2013. In collaboration with the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents and campus chancellors, he developed the Growth Agenda for Wisconsin, a long-term vision and strategic framework for what the university needed to do to help Wisconsin and the nation be more competitive in the global knowledge economy. Kevin has also served as chancellor of the University of Wisconsin Extension from 2000 to 2004, and as provost and vice chancellor from 1996 to 2000. And before that, he served as the associate provost for academic programs for the State University of New York system, and then as secretary for the university. Earlier in his career, Kevin led the New York State Board of Regents office that evaluated and accredited all public, private, and for-profit colleges and universities in the state. Kevin has served on the steering committee for 4 Wisconsin State Economic Summits. So Kevin is also the same consultant for the Association of Governing Boards that led the comprehensive evaluation, you might recall, several years ago for President Schultz. Kevin is on contract with Washington State University and has been a trusted advisor for both myself and President Schultz over the last several months. And so I welcome Kevin to join us today and invite him to get started with his presentation. Thank you, Kevin.
Well, thank you very much, Regent Chair Shower. It's very nice to be with you and President Schultz and the other regents, and I see some chancellors in the room whom I know as well. And it's nice, despite, I might say, the horrible hospitality you showed to the Badgers at Martin Stadium last Saturday. I'm still smarting from that one. I do see some familiar faces on the board. from my last engagement with Washington State. Good to see you, and some new faces too, and good to meet you all. And let me start by saying something that builds on with what your chair was saying about volunteer status, which is simply thank you for your service. I don't think those of us in higher ed say this enough to our trustees, our board members. You know, it's when you take on these roles, it's a little like you paint a bullseye on your back, right? People fire arrows into it, and they will. That reminds me of this great remark by Oscar Wilde about the difference between your friends and your enemies. And he said that enemies will stab you in the back while your friends will stab you in the front. And you may find in your service as a regent, you've gotten stabbed in the front once in a while. It's part of the job that you do. So thank you seriously for doing it. So as per my instructions from Chair Schauer and President Schultz, we'll have a conversation today about some basic principles of effective trusteeship in higher education. Then after today's session, as Regent Schauer alluded to, we'll ask you to fill out a board self-survey form that has questions about how you're thinking about your governance responsibilities and approaches. And then, as your chair said, I'll be with you at your November meeting so we can look together then at the results of that survey and how they align with these principles that are the focus of today's meeting. So let me say, I think this is a well-conceived board development plan. And one, by the way, that is like what accrediting bodies across the country are more and more asking boards to do as part of their service, to assess where they are in performing that service, make any changes as necessary going forward. So bully for you all for doing this. As you'll see, today's principles, hopefully you've had a chance to look at them already, are more or less kind of, you could say, simple common sense guidelines. The trick, of course, is to decide how to apply these in the controversial, tricky situations you often face as public university system governing boards. So these are more or less, received wisdom principles from AGB, but I always like to remind myself and folks I talk to about this of what Tip O'Neill used to like to say about politics, and that is all politics is local. So you may find as we discuss these principles today that one of them you think, wow, this doesn't really work so well for us at Washington State University. Or as we think about our governance role here, behaving this way might work well if we're talking about the Pullman campus, but not about the Vancouver campus. So if you find yourself with those kinds of feelings, thinking, well, I wonder if this really applies very well here, say so, and let's talk about that. And I'm thinking, as you think about your governance role, to further complicate things, you're not just one institution, you are now a 6-campus university system. The last time I worked with you, you were one institution with campuses. Now you're a system with those institutions or campuses within it. You've evolved in that way since my last encounter with you. And that makes a difference. And, I like to make an analogy between a well-functioning university system and a tile mosaic. And that is, in a tile mosaic, each tile, or in this case, a campus, is polished to a high gloss in its own color with its own edging. No two are the same in shape or size, but they all work together as part of an integrated whole that amplifies the value of each part. That's an ideal of the way a system should function. Probably almost no system fully does, but I think that's the ideal to be strived for. So as we look at these principles of trusteeship today, let's keep in mind particularly how they relate to system governance. And let's keep it conversational as we go along. We have no syllabus to get through today. I want this to go to where areas that you want to talk about, so it's most helpful to you where you are now as trustees of Washington State University. And I have the advantage here that I will be back, as your chair said, in November, and we can kind of pick up things that we didn't cover today and build on those in November. So I look forward to that as well. But let's start today by looking at the first 2 slides on challenges to effective boards. So if we could move to that first set of challenges. So one of these talks about how boards are an unusual collection, and that's an unusual collection of people, kind of like an orchestra without the optimal mix of members that rarely rehearses. And in cases like yours, open meetings laws and rules can make it pretty difficult to rehearse in that formal sense that an orchestra does. And I know you're thinking about a little bit about how as a public board, in compliance with your open meetings laws, you advance your agendas and have serious discussions about them in public. And we'll come back and talk a little bit about that later. It's kind of an orchestra with a wealth of conductors or a wealth of first violins. I haven't met too many boards where people identify themselves as the second, third, or fourth violins. Powerful personalities with personal priorities. Often people come onto boards very focused on an issue or an aspect or two of what's going on at the university they're there to govern. And then the question is, how do you bring those in, follow those as you need to, get answers to those as you need to, but also then meld that into the overall work of the board with a lot of other powerful personalities with their own priorities. And you as the kind of board you are really have no sanctions or ultimate arbitrators, or very few of those. One way to think about this is that you as the kind of board you are need to govern two institutions. You need to govern Washington State University, and you need to govern yourselves, because there's really nobody else there to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about how you might think about that role. Okay, we can go to the next slide, which is about an unusual context. We first talked about an unusual collection, and this is about an unusual context that is the board context you're in. So you come to the university and you find that it's familiar yet foreign culture. And by that I mean, if you think about when was the last time you were in college as a student, except for your student regent, probably a few years ago. And what I always find, and I think most board members I work with find, is that as you think about the issues of Washington State University or any college where you're a trustee, you tend constantly to hearken back to what the college experience was when you were there, which may well not be what the college experience is now, in large part for a lot of your students. And it's good to keep reminding yourselves of that. Another aspect of this familiar yet foreign culture is the difference between the academic culture and business culture and trade association culture and government culture. And Gerhard Casper, who's one of the former presidents at Stanford, used to like to describe the feeling that he saw members coming onto his board, private institution there obviously have, especially perhaps if you're from a business background. And he likened it to the American who is going to London, flies into Heathrow, needs to rent a car to go about his business, and he goes to the car rental facility and he's looking at the cars in the row that the guy tells him you can pick from. And he's walking down and thinks, my God, the steering wheels are on the wrong side in these cars. And then he drives to the edge of the parking lot for the rental cars, and he's got to go out and get on the road. He looks left, he looks right, and he thinks, my God, they're driving on the wrong side of the road here. So sometimes when people get on a university board, if it's their first time immersing themselves in the academic culture as governors, they feel a little bit that way. Another thing that makes it a challenge to do this job well that you have is the kind of elusive performance metrics that you have. It's not simply a matter of the bottom line gains and losses. You have a lot of other things to think about, some of which are quite quantifiable, some of which are not so quantifiable. And there are a myriad of them in a number of different domains. You also have, let me link these two bullets, the last two: limited time and knowledge, episodic engagement, and full-time professionals reporting to part-time volunteers. Who are you? So you're not running the institution. You're stopping by, in effect, quite regularly to see how it's running and to give President Schultz and the chancellors and their leadership teams the benefit of your experience and wisdom on how it might best be run. So these are just, as we think about the principles for effective trusteeship, I thought it wouldn't be a bad place to start to say, what are some of the challenges, some of the unusual problems or issues that you confront in applying the kinds of principles that I'll talk about in a minute. And so let me stop here for a second and ask, are these governance challenges that you feel you face at the moment at Washington State University? If so, how do you think you're doing in handling them? If not, are there other particular challenges at the moment for you as trustees at Washington State? And we could come back in a minute and talk a little bit about the challenge of open meetings, perhaps. But what else is on your mind in the way of challenges to the jobs that you're dedicated to doing?
I didn't have any challenges that came to mind. More on the positive side, I have a high level of trust of my colleagues, and I enjoy listening to their perspective from their life experience. And I think we have done an exceptional job of trying to provide the president and the administrators with our input without interfering or without overstepping what might often happen on boards. None of us are hiring our own football coaches or anything like that. And so it seems like a real positive group, and it's been a great experience for me. So I'm just on the positive side weighing in.
Great to hear. We'll come back to that issue of trust in a little bit too. Any other thoughts?
I would say on the continuity of board leadership. So I think I find it on any board as different, in particular executive teams and chairs of the board, sometimes very unintentionally and sometimes very intentional. Board chairs step into the role with their own agenda items. And so then you have your administration on a bit of a, you have the tail wagging the dog at times, depending upon the type of chair you may or may not have. And I think we're trying really hard right now as an executive team to be aligned in that. But it does ebb and flow just based on the sheer nature of change on a consistent basis of leadership.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I'm sure President Schultz would confirm this, that as you work as the president and you have a change in your board chair, your job changes in some pretty interesting ways because you're dealing with different approaches from that chair, and that partnership with the president is so important, as you all know, between the president and the chair. And this is another challenge to all of the board members, I think, because you have fairly frequent change in your leadership in terms of who the board chair is going to be. And that change can really make a change in the way you need to operate. So adapting to that is another one of the challenges over time that I think all college and university boards have.
I had a question for you, and maybe this is more appropriate for later in the conversation, so feel free to table it. But in the for-profit context, at least, I'm used to doing regular board evaluations, and we have not done that historically at this board. And there are different ways of doing that, of course. You can do a whole board evaluation, but I don't think that's very effective. I think doing individual board member evaluations can sometimes be a better way to tease out specific performance issues and lead to coaching of individual board members and also just coaching of the entire board for how to be more effective. and can sometimes help management, get more support from the board or more constructive engagement from the board. How have you seen that deployed or not in the university context?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's much more common now that boards are doing this. The Association of Governing Boards, which I work with as a consultant and I'm working with now with you on, they do have this form that I referenced earlier, which is a self-survey form, which really is an opportunity for you to assess how you think you're doing in a number of the domains that you have to deal with as governors of the university. So you'll actually see that form shortly after this meeting. We will ask each regent to fill out the form in his or her own. This will be done anonymously. We'll get the results back. We'll analyze the results, and we can talk about those at the November meeting in the context of having gone through these principles. So in a sense, I didn't use this term in my introduction, but in a sense, this process that Lisa and Kirk have laid out for us really is a kind of self-assessment of where you think you are, where you have strengths, where you might want to work on some issues going forward. And it's much more common now that university boards are doing this, like it has been for much longer, I think, in the for-profit world. And as I did reference, the accrediting bodies are looking more consistently for boards to do this. So if you have done it, and you will be able to say you've done it now going forward, that's a plus when your accreditation folks come around the next time.
I have just a couple comments, if I may. I've been on the board since 2014, and I think one of the hallmarks of the WSU board, which has changed quite a bit over time, is that we are all very focused on, supporting the university. We don't always agree, but we're always respectful for each other, and I think that's been a real hallmark of this board. Some of the things that you mentioned as challenges, certainly I have, over the years seen some of them. I think that one of the things that I think is often very hard is when someone does have an agenda and it's a personal agenda, and that can be it could be a chair, it could be a member, but it is really important to understand this, not everything can be accommodated, and that when you do have a personal agenda, and it could be almost anything, that if it can't be accommodated, it just needs to go away. And I think over the years, I've seen that occasionally on this board, and I've seen it on other boards as well. And I think it's really important for us all to be really cognizant that we need to stay at that high level and not get down in the weeds, regardless of how maybe important the issue is to us personally.
Well said. All right.
I wanted to add one thing for me. When I joined this board, COVID started. And so all of the, my initial meetings, and normally you would come to the university and kind of go through and meet people on campus. I didn't have that. Everything was via Zoom. And it was just odd doing everything by Zoom. It was because it took a long time before I was able to meet people in person. And so I and I know we use that a lot now with Zoom, but I just found that it's very important to be able to engage in person rather than over Zoom or whatever other type of video outlet you're using, because I think to build a relationship with people on the board and getting to know them and all of that, I kind of felt lost for a while. So, and that was unusual, but I think it's still there. And I'm on some other boards where people don't show up. Everybody's still doing it via Zoom. and I don't know them, and that's weird to me. So I'm glad that we aren't doing that, and that, for the most part, everybody shows up.
Well, that's great, and I'm glad to hear that. And I think boards are social networks, and they run on trust. And it's a lot easier to build trust if you're looking people in the eye and breaking bread with them over dinner between your meetings and all that kind of stuff. So good for you for trying to do that. You're reminding me that I don't know, about 6 or 7 months into the COVID epidemic, I was doing some consulting with a private college, and they had hired their new president after COVID started. So he had met in person with the search committee, but he had not met the full board. And this was now a year after he'd been hired. He'd never had a meeting in person with his full board, and it really was affecting how he got off to a start there in his presidency. So I think we've seen some of that unfortunate stuff happen as a result of the strictures that COVID has placed on us. Glad to hear you're where you are in it. All right, maybe we can move to the next slide if we can. So these principles are grouped here in 3 categories in the Wheel of Fortune. There are 9 of them. 3 grouped under understanding governance, because certainly universities are curious, complicated places that it takes a while to understand, and what of your duties fall under that. Thinking strategically, how do you keep reminding yourselves that it is about the big picture strategy? That's what you're responsible for, and the day-to-day operations are what president and the chancellors and their colleagues are responsible for. And then leading by example. You are all public figures in the state of Washington by virtue of serving on the board at Washington State University. And people, those of you who've been on for a while know this, people watch you, and they make judgments based on your behavior about Washington State University, how well it's doing, whether they want to have their son or their daughter go, or whether they want to go themselves. So those are the 3 broad sort of categories we've dropped these principles into. But let's start looking at the principles themselves. So if we can look at the next slide. So embrace the full scope of your responsibilities as a board member. And they're classically characterized as fiduciary responsibilities, right? You act on behalf of the public to further the public's interest in the success of Washington State University, and you're responsible to safeguard that long-term sustainability for future generations of students and future citizens in Washington. It's about making sure that your current students have best possible experience that they can, making sure that your outreach and engagement with the locations your campuses are in and statewide now is humming, but it's also about how do actions we take or don't take now affect the future health of the university and its service to the state. This is a collective endeavor, these responsibilities, right? No one trustees or a group of trustees is the board. The board is the board, simply put, and the chair or her designee speaks for the board. So do I have that correct in the way you think about it? If so, how do you think about how trustees beyond the chair or ought to engage with the institution's many stakeholders, with the media who will sometime approach you? Have you established some ground rules for how you all do that beyond the chair as a spokesperson?
I don't know of any written protocols. The personal ones are try to be unified as a board consensus delivered through the chair, and anything other than that, if someone does want to meet with me, almost invariably the president knows about it, either before or immediately after, usually before. And or I give him a report of what we may or may not have talked about. So those are my personal interactive rules.
I think that's a great before and after rule. Let the president know that somebody's asked to meet with you, and then give him a report after you do. And hopefully that will allow the board and the president to take whatever actions they need following up on that conversation. So great.
Typically, just to add to what Brett said, typically what happens is if there is a major controversial topic or something that raises a lot of public awareness in the press, we will receive a series of talking points so that if we, are approached by someone, we stick to those, and we are always to try to the greatest extent possible to refer them to the public, to our communications director.
Very good. Yep. Sounds great. The third bullet, prepare in advance, show up fully present, and participate productively. So this is just, kind of do your homework. And let me say that I have never had a board member come to me after 3 or 4 or 5 months on a board and say, Kevin, this is a lot less work than we thought it was going to be. That has never happened. Almost always the opposite happens. So we realize that. Again, thank you for doing that homework, but it's really important that you do. Could I have the next slide? Respect the difference between the board's role and the administration's role, and you've already begun to address this in the conversation we've had. So, your role is to shape strategy, set policy, support goals, and hold the executive accountable. And look for a minute at the nature of the verbs in that top bullet: shape, set, support, hold accountable. And look at the verbs in the bottom bullet on this slide: manage, implement, operate. That's not your role. The bullet at the top has the verbs that are your role. And in carrying that out, you share governance. This is, one of the unusual, if not unique, aspects of the modern American university. It's shared governance traditions, and in some cases, policies, in some cases like Wisconsin, laws. The terms of shared governance for the University of Wisconsin are actually in state statute, with specific areas where faculty, staff, and students have particular responsibilities and authority under the shared governance umbrella. But whether it's in law or not, in most states it's not. That's a fact of the way the university operates. And understanding that and understanding the difference between your role and not only the role of the administration, but faculty, staff, and students is really an important thing to conjure with. Accept recommendations from governance partners, not unconditionally, but respectfully. A lot of good and patient listening is required. I think you all recognize that. And then thoughtful questions based on that careful listening is the way you really advance your mission. And serve as a thought partner, a sounding board, pro bono advisor. Collaborate with the president, chancellors, their staffs to adapt and apply your experience to the institution's circumstances. And this is one of the great strengths of American higher education. Most other countries, as you probably know, don't have this very deep tradition of lay governance of our college and universities. And it's been, I would argue, a real strength for us because folks like you come and bring to the university the experience you have in different realms about what's successful, what works well in business, in healthcare, in the military, other government work and apply it to the university. But that does take some adaptation, some interpretation, and close work with your administrative leadership to make that role of a thought partner, a sounding board, pro bono advisor work really well. And then don't manage, implement, or operate. Again, now this is simple to say, kind of harder to do. So let's go to the next set of slides and we'll have a little fun with trying to figure out how to do that. So what I'd suggest is we read silently through this next set of slides that has a management versus governance theme and columns. On the one side, management kinds of questions. On the other side, what I'm suggesting are governance kinds of questions. And let's just read through them silently, and then we'll come back and open up a discussion.
I see a few smiles as we read some of those, but probably the only one that's come up for me is someone might suggest that they're looking for a job, and that's not my role. Or someone will say their daughter or granddaughter is applying to a certain college, and and they want me to know that, and I go, I'm very happy for them that they chose to apply, but thank the Lord, most of them got in. They may or may not give me credit for that, but that's not our, that's not our role.
Right. And there have been major instances in the past of university leadership and boards getting into big trouble on that one. University of Illinois, a number of years back, this is all public, so I'm not telling any tales out of school, had a system for kind of rating special applicants from families they were interested in being in the good graces of. And this all came out, major scandal, and the president of the system, the president of Urbana-Champaign, and the board were all replaced over it. So care around that one is certainly important, as is care around a number of these, keeping those distinctions. Let's talk about this though. So this implies this whole scheme, and I hope you've had a chance to look at all the slides. I don't know if they ran through all of them for you, but there's an assumption here that there's a line, right, between the two sides. You got management on one side of a line, governance on another. I think that's true. That should be true, but the lines are not always straight. They can kind of wiggle depending on the given situation, and there's some bleed across those lines, I think. So we're talking about COVID a little earlier. One of the things that I saw was in the case of COVID, there were two different kinds of adaptations by boards and presidents. Some institutions, the boards leaned way in, farther than they normally would, into management and governance. And many of those instances, the president was asking for that kind of leaning in because they knew they were often making choices that could result in a serious illness or death of people on their campus, including young people on their campus. And they wanted the governance body, or at least the governance leadership, to be very aware minute by minute of what was going on. In other cases, the governance body said, look, this is one where we really need to step out and let the president and her leadership team run this day to day, and just have them keep us apprised of it, and we'll do it that way. And that's was kind of a situation where I saw it work either way pretty well. And there are other crisis moments like that. That certainly was a big one, where that line gets a little blurry or wiggly, and that's not necessarily bad. And let me give you one example of that. If you go, if we can get to the slide that starts on the management side, why is the grass so tall? It's one or two, yeah, it might be, there we go, yeah. If you look down at the bottom question under management, how much will we raise our tuition rates? And then you look at the 3 bullets that parallel that under governance. How does our revenue mix compare to our peer institutions? What is our long-term dependence on tuition? What are the alternatives? And what's the student sensitivity to tuition increases? And how do we know what that sensitivity is? Well, this isn't meant to say, obviously, that the board should not ask or know how much will we raise our tuition rates. You've got to, I presume, vote on that, know it. But the point there is that unless you have taken the time to ask and get adequate answers to questions like those 3 under the governance column, you can't make a good governance decision on what to approve in terms of a tuition rate. And I think the overall point of this funny little exercise here is, it's not that there's always a clean, hard, and fast line, but that if you get too focused on the management questions, you will lose focus on the strategic governance questions, which are the ones that you need to keep your focus on for the current and future benefit of the university. So constantly being aware of, am I getting too far into the weeds on this issue? Are we looking far enough ahead rather than immediately behind us? Are all good questions for governing boards to ask themselves. Any reactions to all that as we move on to the next principle? Sounds like you're conscious of that line, and that's great to hear. All right, let's go on to the next one, principle 3. Go to the next slide. Get off these management versus governance slides there. Be an ambassador for your institution and advocate for higher education too. So advocate for your university system as an informed, objective, sharp-eyed interpreter. You know, think about this. You will know more about, and already do for those of you who've been on the board for a while, more about Washington State University than anybody who's not an employee of Washington State University. You have a unique set of understandings of what the university is about, its problems, its challenges, as well as its glories. And, you know, as you think of that role, being an ambassador, and I think it's an increasingly important one as questions are raised among some of our fellow Americans about the value of a higher education. You're being able to say, look, we've got some issues here. Let me tell you how we and President Schultz are trying to address those issues. And let me tell you where we want to get in the long run on that set of issues. And let me tell you about 2 other things that are just really, really wonderful things that your state university is doing for the citizens of Washington. That kind of a balance is something you can have exercise in your role as an ambassador. And you do serve in that sense as a bridge between the university and its many stakeholders. You bring information into the university that they would not otherwise have, and you can carry information out from the university with a unique credibility that those of us who get paid to be leaders of universities don't have by virtue of that kind of self-institutional interest. So you're and a metaphor I like to use is you're border runners in that sense, right? You exist on the border between the university and the world outside of it. Unique position that you have. Or another metaphor that sometimes is helpful is to think of a kind of heating panel, and you can be the buffer, keeping some of the heat out that you don't think should influence or disrupt the university. And you can also serve as a conduit when you think some of the heat needs to come in so the university can adequately be aware of it and respond to it. So it's a really unique, important role. And in that role, you might think sometimes, well, do I represent the taxpayers or the university? And I don't know what you all think about that. I once had the Speaker of the Assembly in Wisconsin come in and address the Board of Regents at the University of Wisconsin system. And he said, well, you folks on this Board of Regents, you should represent the taxpayers. You don't represent the university, you represent the taxpayers. And, I would respectfully disagree with that. I think you represent both. And that's part of why it's a hard job. And in a way, one of the best things you can do for those taxpayers is keeping the university healthy, thriving for the students that are there now and the future taxpayers of the state, based on all the investment the taxpayers of Washington have already made in Washington State University. By the way, that Speaker of the Assembly who said that was a former student regent of the University of Wisconsin system. So I think he kind of was a regent gone bad in that regard, but that was his position. So I hope your student regent won't go there. I saw him speaking earlier. Seems like he won't. And then the Saturday morning supermarket conversation, we kind of already, Brett got into this a little bit. You're walking down the ice cream aisle on a Saturday morning at the food store, and you're at the novelty ice cream fridge, and you're reaching in to get that Eskimo pie, and up comes Mrs. McGillicuddy and says, this is awful. My son has this terrible accounting professor, and he might get a B in the course. Now he always gets A's in his math, any math related courses. And what are you going to do about this? This is terrible teaching that this person is doing. So, you'll get those complaints if you haven't already. How do you handle them in this role as an ambassador, a border runner, a heat letter inner, a heat keeper outer kind of person? What have you done? Those of you maybe who have some experience having that ice cream discussion or somewhere like it.
It's a quiet group over here, Kevin. It's between, the last 15 minutes before lunch now, I can start to see it. So keep going, Kevin.
It may be just that the people in Washington are a lot nicer. They don't accost you at the stores. All right.
I assure you, we feel accosted.
All right, let's go on to item number 4. So conduct yourselves with impeccable integrity. Trust and reputations are, are hard to gain and easy to lose. I always think that all regents ought to take the Hippocratic oath like physicians do, do no harm, right? Do no harm. And where you have conflicts of interest, they can be managed partly by those next 2 bullets, clearly disclosing more rather than less information, stepping aside from voting and discussion on an issue where you or a family member is involved. And I think, good practice would urge there that if you've got an issue where you have an interest or somebody close to you does, you say that. And I'd recommend saying it out loud, saying, well, look, I've got, a family member who works for this corporation where they're applying to build our next building, and I'm going to recuse myself from both the discussion and the voting. I've had regents, even better practice, say that and say, call me when the discussion and the vote's done, and they go out of the room. Demonstrating that kind of care to the public, I think, is important and very good policy. You know how your conflict of interest policy is. I won't take time to ask you about that here, but certainly you should all know what it is and be comfortable that it's a good one, and that you periodically check that you're all aware of it and following it. All right, next slide. Think independently and act collectively. How open is the board to dissenting opinions? How are tensions handled? Well, I was glad to hear a couple of you already say, at least, you feel like, yeah, people do listen. If there's disagreements, you try to work it out. So that's good. There's obviously an important role for the board chair here in presiding over those discussions that may get a little contentious at times and helping to move them forward despite or through that contention. Independent is not unilateral. That is, you all need to be independent thinkers. You need to be able to state your opinions clearly, forcefully at board meetings. but it's not a unilateral situation either. It's when it comes to action, post the discussion, post the vote, when it comes to communications about why the board voted, why it was taking a certain action, that's when, even if you disagree with the action, you need to get behind the action of the board and say, well, I may have disagreed with this, but I respect the wisdom of the majority of my colleagues, and maybe the next time in the next vote on another issue, it will go my way. Diversity of members' expertise and experience. I already kind of addressed this about the value of the diverse experiences you bring to the board, and I won't go back over that. Thinking independently happens inside the boardroom. Acting collectively happens outside of it. So I hope that all makes sense. It sounds, again, like more, quite frankly, than some other boards I have worked with, and this was true in my experience with you a couple of years ago. I think you follow that principle pretty well. So item 6, model justice, equity, and inclusion. Well, talk about a hot button now, right? I mean, this principles has jumped up on all university boards' agendas in the recent years because of the reckoning with racial equality, racial justice we've had in the last couple of years, and more recently, the discussion around wokeism, and if we've gone too far, and if certain views are being shut down. So this is a touchy, tricky one, and I would like to hear how you think you're doing on this one, but let me make a couple quick comments about it. So, you are ultimately accountable for a great environment for all the students you admit who are your students, and for the faculty and staff who you employ. On the student side, we now have nationally in the United States something like 18 million undergraduates, right? It was up, I think, to 20 million or so before the pandemic. It slipped back. It's come back up to somewhere around 18. When I was an undergraduate many, many moons ago, we had 6 million American undergraduates. So we've tripled the size of the enterprise in about 50 years. And when I was a student, many of you were students, I assume, it was a much more homogenous group. I mean, we have students now that are much more diverse in terms of their ethnic, racial, economic status backgrounds, sexual identity backgrounds, political identity and association backgrounds. And they come to us with a much wider set of expectations, hopes, worries, life situations than students when it was a much smaller group of undergraduates did. And part of your role is to see that the university is attending to all of those needs. And once you admit a student, you admit them in good faith, believing that they can and should succeed in being retained in getting a degree from Washington State University. It won't happen for every student. Life happens along the way, but your role is to see that you have that kind of environment that makes it possible for as many students as you can pursue equitable outcomes. It's not just about, do we have the right percentages of students from different groups? It's about, are there different outcomes for different kinds of students? And how do our dashboards on retention, graduation, grade point averages look when we look at those broken out by different kinds of student groups? Look hard for those barriers. We all have them. Is it the one that always gets tagged, that math course that so many students flunk in freshman year? Is it a lack of daycare access for the growing number of students we have who are parents themselves or looking after siblings? Some focus on what can we remove to have that more welcoming atmosphere to improve our outcomes is really important. Pay attention to which voices are loudest or silent. One way to think about this is listening for what you're not hearing, which is a good skill to develop. Recognize and appreciate personal journeys. There are just, as I said at the outset on this one, more and more different kinds of personal journeys which lead people into and through universities. Now, some people starting much later than they ever did in the past. Some people starting at 18, but dropping out and then coming back, and then dropping out again and then coming back again. How do we recognize and appreciate all those journeys in the interest of full justice, equity, and inclusion? So how do you feel you're doing on this hot button? What's the nature of your discussion around it been in recent months or years?
I feel that there's a real commitment with this board to equity and to well, I think the makeup of this board really represents that, which is makes me feel good about being a part of this board. And I think that we're fortunate with all of that. I always have to say, you know, we're fortunate with the type of governor we have, and also the commitment, I think, to diversity, equity, inclusion in the state. While there might be among the electorate out there differing opinions, but I think, you know, we're not Florida, let's put it that way. And so I think that that's a good thing. And but I think we're very fortunate to have voices on this board and representation that is very committed.
Great to hear.
I would add that I think that is reflected in President Schultz's leadership in his selection and support of his leadership team. And so I think while he may influence the appointments of the board, that is through the governor's office, as Regent Cerna just mentioned. But what he does influence and control within the university has certainly made an impact in how he's leading. And so I think it's important that it's both at this board table, but then beyond that in both the initiatives, the programs, and the leadership. And so that resources piece is always the area where there's never enough money to fund this. And that's where the real, I think, power in the work that we're doing is not just policies and programs and showing in the representation, but it's also being able to fund it. And so we just need some more money.
I've never heard that before from a university. Regent Shower. All right. Well, I know we're getting close to the end here. Let me move on to let's see, the next slide. Learn about your institution's mission, constituents, culture, context. We've talked a little bit about related matters here, and I was listening in on your earlier session and noted that Regent Dickinson talked about telling the story. How do we tell this story? And boy, you know, there are always so many great things going on in an institution, a system like Washington State. We never fully reach the potential we have in telling the stories of all of those things. And glad to hear you're focused on that. Let's just rush through these next couple. Number 8, focus on what matters most to the institution's long-term sustainability. I'll just comment on the first bullet here in the interest of time. Oversight, insight, foresight. And there's a guy by the name of Dick Chait, who was a longtime professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, who really was the leading academic on boards. And he came up with these 3 sort of attributes that boards bring to their work. And they're kind of sequential. That is, you come on and initially there's an awful lot of simple oversight you have to do. That is learning all about the place. What is this thing I'm looking over and now need to govern over? How do I learn about that? The more you get that knowledge under your belt, the more understanding you develop. And then you start to have some insight, not just about what the facts are, but how the university works writing on those facts, where its strengths are, where its weaknesses are, what you need to do to improve on the weaknesses, continue and build on the strengths. And then after a little more time, that gift of foresight, after you've done the oversight, you start to get insight, looking forward, helping to look over the next mountaintop to the 2 or 3 beyond that in the university's future. It's kind of a way to look at the lifespan of a board member, if you want, which I think is good in thinking about how you contribute to that long-term sustainability. There are three other aspects of or gifts that a governing board's trustees bring that are sometimes cited, which are a little different. Wit, the three W's: wit, wisdom, and wealth. And presidents are sometimes interested in the last one intensely, so that's not unheard of. All right, let's go on to slide 9. Ask insightful questions and listen with an open mind. I think this issue of having enough information to figure out what the right questions you want to ask are, and then knowing when to ask those questions and of whom to ask those questions. And this gets to be sometimes a delicate issue. You all probably you certainly all work with Kirk. You work with his senior leadership team. You work with others, perhaps in the university. How do you know who to ask what about when? And that's, there's no clear answer on that other than the president's knowing if you're asking other people about it, or certainly when you get down below the level of a associate vice president, let's say, or down below that, having the senior leadership know what you're asking and why you want to know it is really helpful to the good of the order. And that middle bullet there goes to this. This is not a competitive debate. You're not in a advocacy situation in a courtroom. You're not in a public debate of any kind, running for office where you want to have a gotcha with your opponent. That's not the role of trustees. It's to think about what you need to know and press to get to know what you think you need to know from the right people, and be assured then that you've got good evidence for the decisions you all need to make. So let's jump to the next one and we can wrap this up. So this is just a nice summary, I think, of issues around board culture, which is kind of what we've been talking about all along. And there's a great quote from Gertrude Stein, who was a modernist American writer in Paris, had a salon there that a lot of the modernist American writers hung out in when they were in Paris, which they were a lot. And her definition of culture was how we do everything around here. So board culture is kind of how the board does everything around here. And you can go down the list of the healthy behaviors and the unhealthy behaviors. And we could talk about these for a long time. I love the huddle of quarterbacks one. If you think of Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and maybe Josh Allen from the Bills, all in the huddle calling plays together, you can imagine how well the football team that they were doing that in would do. Same with boards. You are team players when you're on a board. Bottom line, if we get to the literal bottom line of these two columns underneath both of them, I think the point is that the healthy behaviors build trust. The unhealthy behaviors destroy trust, right? And boards, as I said before, for their effectiveness, really need to have a lot of trust among members. They need to have a lot of trust with president and his or her senior administration. So being mindful of which behaviors heighten the trust, which behaviors tend to undermine it, is an important thing you can all do in the interest of Washington State University. And then finally, the last slide has 3 questions, which you can start to think about now. You'll find these questions sort of the overarching questions behind this self-survey that we'll ask you to complete. And then we can talk about how you feel about these questions, what you think the answers are now, where you want to go in the future based on your answers now when we get to the November meeting. So I'm going to stop there just a little bit over, Chair Shower, and I'm happy to take any questions people have, but you need to control the clock the way you need to. So.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation and the dialogue. Are there any questions?
I would like to ask if you've seen some good ways that boards handle the situation where constituents want to directly talk to the board and it becomes too much.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, back to Brett's rule about if you're going to talk to any constituents or any group of constituents, certainly, bigger the group, the more important the group, letting the president know first that that you've been asked to meet with them. Probably you know a little bit about why they want to meet with you, and you have that conversation with the president, and he can help fill you in on where his thinking is on what their issues might be. Meeting with them, listening respectfully is often much appreciated. And I think coming back then and saying, well, I hear you. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to talk to President Schultz and we'll get back to you, leaving it a little vague as to who actually will do the getting back. I think, that's healthy behavior. You can't do so much of that people start to want to, I call it adopt the region behavior. This is our region and we go to her every time we have a problem and we expect her to deliver for us and solve that problem. If you get the feeling that people want to use you that way, I think saying to them, I'm getting this uncomfortable feeling, and that's not my role, right? Let me explain to you what my role is. But I think being open and happy to meet with different groups. And I was heartened in the discussion in the earlier session I had the privilege of sitting in on a little bit. You're talking about how you like to get out to the campuses so you can be visible to faculty and staff and presumably interact with them in some ways. And since you have so many faculty and staff at the Pullman campus, how that's an important part of being visible and available to the people who work for and with you. Does that make sense as an answer? And if people think different on that one, speak up. If President Schultz thinks different on that, he can speak up. But how about, does that make sense to you?
Yes, and I wanted to thank you for your presentation today. I found it very helpful. And I know a couple times we've been quiet, but for me at least, I was thinking about a lot of things. So I really appreciate Lisa and Kevin. Great call.
Thank you. Well, keep those questions in mind and bring them back to the November meeting.
I'm looking forward to seeing the survey or the self-assessment, and would be interested in how well that works. So just because I haven't had great experience with those in the past, just because everybody tends to sort of give themselves a high grade, and so I've seen other things work better, but I'm open-minded. So just so you know, you've got an open-minded skeptic here, but looking forward to going through that process.
I understand that and respect that skepticism. The way I've seen this work well before is you will typically, they are anonymous. Typically you'll get pretty high self-assessments, but often on the more controversial issues, there'll be one or two people who don't give as high. And what I like to do is focus in on the areas where there's some disagreement and say, well, most of you feel this way, but some of you really don't feel this way on this issue. What's that about? And you can have some pretty interesting discussions that way.
Our president will assess each of us in addition. Okay, well, I look forward to the conversation with you in person, and there's some homework between now and then, and I think engaging and answering the questions that are on the screen will be helpful. Thank you for the time. I know that we did extend further, which does move our schedule a little bit more. We're going to try and get back on schedule. We have a couple committee meetings that have quite a bit of content that we'll want to make it through. So I am hopeful that we'll be back at 12:45. So everyone have a great lunch, and the Board of Regents will return at 12:45 for our scheduled Academic and Student Affairs Committee. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.